Greetings and welcome to this light edition of an episode of Captain's Yacht, a Star Trek The Next Generation review series done by two inner-city high school teachers. The purpose of these light episodes is to demonstrate more intermediate levels of video editing and videography for students that have the basic understanding of how podcasting works and decide they want to expand on their knowledge. An added purpose of our light episodes is to break Scholar Beta's and my discussions of Star Trek The Next Generation from a 90-minute podcast episode into smaller, more manageable pieces for you, the YouTube audience. So let's beam aboard the Captain's Yacht and see what we're all talking about today. All right, so let's bring it home with Naked Now.
Let's do it.
All right.
Welcome to the last part of our pilot episode on
The home
Star
stretch.
Trek: The Next Generation. Yep, we are in the
Seventh inning
home
stretch right
now.
here.
The Naked Now. Why don't you get us started off with your notes about universe building versus cheap fan service? Because I have some stuff on this too.
So this is something that I was thinking about when we were watching this video, watching this episode. There seems to be, because of the times that we live in and the argument that there's no creativity anymore, there seems to be a lot of criticism where if a franchise that has been around for a while mentions something that's happened before, people are quick to point out that it's cheap fan service. There is, not to get too much into it, but that's one of the main criticisms for the most recent Star Wars movies.
Facts.
Yeah. That's a discussion for another time. So I wanted to explore very briefly what qualifies as an operational definition of legitimate universe building versus cheap fan service. And there's a little bit of both in this episode, I've noticed, and I'm curious to see your perspective on this, Mr. Beta. The best example of universe building from my perspective is The Wrath of Khan being a buildup of Space Seed and expansion of that resolution.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think anybody would try to point that out as cheap fan service. It's one of the greatest Star Trek stories ever told. But then you take an example of, I hope I don't offend, but Star Trek Into Darkness, which in my definition of fan service versus legitimate universe building, that is the cheapest of cheap. When you straight up lift dialogue. When I was watching that movie in the theaters with my wife and they're in that radiation chamber, I called the dialogue before it happened.
Absolutely.
That is definitely cheap fan service. And for better or worse, there's good examples of both parts, universe building and cheap fan service, in this episode. But I'm curious to see your perspective on this, Mr. Beta.
You know, that's really interesting. I'm thinking of like, when, I know this is going to sound strange, but when did fan service become a thing? You know, I feel like it wasn't necessarily a thing when this TNG pilot was being filmed versus what happens in cinema or film franchises. You know what I'm saying? I don't know why that I'm struggling with this idea, but for some reason I'm just curious, like, when fan service actually launched as an idea. Okay, I'm just gonna set that one musing aside. But what I'm actually thinking also is that fan service has a ton to do with either selling a particular product, you know, like inserting something into a film for no other reason than obviously it's marketable and will help either sell the film, or it will sell like a t-shirt or a video game or an action figure, I guess is honestly the real example, that it wouldn't be able to sell without it being just smashed in. So I know that's not a great explanation or really even an answer to your question, but something I'm really thinking about with this idea is that when did fan service become a thing that was really objectionable Am I confusing that with product placement? I know I'm kind of calling them similar things, but when did it become a real thing? And is fan service connected to just cheap ways to connect yours to a different film that came before that, or is it more of like I'm trying to sell a product and just smash it in there? It's probably a little bit of everything. So
I would
I don't know.
agree with you, and from my perspective, historically, you could make a very compelling argument that it began with the J.J. Abrams reboot.
It may, yeah. Well, are
Because
we talking Trek or Star Wars?
oh,
Because I
touche,
think
too good.
yeah, it's
The
there in
J.J.
both.
Abrams reboot of Star Trek,
Yeah,
where it was less about, and Red Letter Media does a great examination of this. It was less about let's make stories with characters and a continuation of the universe, which they do attempt to some degree in Star Trek '09, the J.J. Abrams reboot. But it's more remember Kirk, remember set phasers to stun, remember
yeah,
beam me up, Scotty. I
yeah,
think if you were to pinpoint a place and time where fan service started becoming the norm and nostalgia
yeah.
trumped or superseded substance, I would say there's a pretty good argument for Star Trek '09. And then J.J. Abrams, there seems to be a trend here. I don't know. Read into that as deeply as you want, but Force Awakens again in 2015.
Yeah, and I feel like the big problem with fan service is that while on the one hand you're going to connect it to you're going to be maybe you'll be able to pull in a little wider audience, the fans themselves are always going to be able to smell it and detect it. You know what I'm saying? There's not
Mm-hmm.
any sort of shortcoming or short amount of data that people put on YouTube showing all the fan service in various films that have come out, and Marvel films, and Star Wars films, and Star Trek films. So, honestly, to be honest, by the time we're starting nitpicking on fan service, there's a million things that are wrong with the film before that. I'm not
Oh
saying it's
yeah,
not a cool issue to talk about. I think you're absolutely right to bring it up, but I don't know. When we start having to talk about that, I think it's indicative of much larger, substance issues with
true.
just the storytelling itself.
Which this is not. Naked Now is clearly not Rise of Skywalker or
No,
Into Darkness. That's why I'm
no.
saying there's a little bit of both there.
So let's give us the example of what's going on in the Naked Now that might count as fan service, and then let's talk a little premise, because we really haven't got into the premise of the episode. So what's this fan service thing you're feeling in Naked Now?
The major plot device is featured in an episode of the original series, the Psi
Absolutely.
2000 virus. The musical sting, the entire musical score is lifted from the original series.
Okay.
The sound effect of infection is an updated version of this rattlesnake sound that you see in Naked Time and you see again in Naked Now. The vessel that they happen to be tractoring, this is splitting hairs a little bit, but as a reference of things that have come before, the Tsiolkovsky is an Oberth class vessel, which was featured. The model itself was featured in Search for Spock as the USS Grissom. It was just redressed to be the
Absolutely was.
Tsiolkovsky.
Yep.
So again,
Science
nowhere
vessel,
near.
right?
Yeah, science vessel, just like the Tsiolkovsky was, just like the Grissom was. Again,
Exactly.
nowhere near as shameful, but it's definitely there. And upon repeat viewing, you might notice it. And now I can't think of anything else now that I've seen it. So those are the fan service things I would think of. But let's get into tropes and themes.
Yeah, so here we go. Let's go on the premise to get us going for the Naked
premise,
Now.
forgive me.
So let's just kind of the big picture in this episode. I'm thinking, while investigating the lost starship, the crew of the Enterprise D is infected by a virus that makes them all, wait for it, drunk. If they get too drunk, they might just end up opening an airlock to cool off. That's basically hinted at in the teaser, right? That's what happens. So there's the premise. And then so we break that down to tropes, right? We have the first trope is the mysterious virus. So this is going to be a science mystery, and it's also going to be a thriller. because we have to resolve this situation on a clock before everyone gets drunk and then does something horribly drastic, like we see in the teaser, basically opening an airlock and everyone being sucked or blown out into space. Which one is it? It's blown out, as we learn. So, yeah, that's the premise. Those are kind of the big sci-fi things we're dealing with. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Considering we both deal with adolescents, neither term is acceptable.
Honestly, very bad. Pushed would probably be the better.
You're
pushed out into space.
Expelled into space. Blasted.
And speaking of things I would not talk about with 14, 15-year-olds, interspecies romance is actually going to be a trope that is really big in this one. We're going to get a romance between a Homo sapien and an android. So that's very exciting, too. And we'll have to talk about that. But yeah, so there's the basic premise. Science mystery. Got to figure out why everyone's falling ill to this virus or acting crazy. And then secondary thriller, because we have a clock, because something terrible could happen. If they put 2 clocks on it, actually. Everyone could get drunk and then the star could blow up. Or it does blow up and then we could get crushed by a star fragment. So, you know, we got 2 things going on there. A filament, whatever they call it. So yeah, but same thing. Mystery and thriller is what's going on here. So, okay, should we get into some deep cuts? Where does the naked... Let's talk about where this thing succeeds. What are you feeling?
This is something... Okay. As imperfect as Naked Now is for its faults, its superficial fan service faults, and a couple plot holes that we're going to talk about later, it is better, in my opinion, than most episodes of New Trek. Now, I want to make my stance on New Trek, by that I mean Kurtzman era Trek, extremely clear.
Yeah.
I am willing to give Kurtzman Trek and those sorts of writers the benefit of the doubt on things. I was okay with Discovery Season 1. Season 2 is when it had problems and the writers fell apart. Picard, we're going to talk about that later. But the biggest thing that I have for new era, Kurtzman era Trek is you don't care about the characters. Case in point, there is a character in Discovery. Her name is Ariam. I did not know who this character was, how... I was going to say they or it, but now it's a robot, but it was a former human. How this individual operates as a human being. Is this person a data person, you know, a data type character? Who knows? Don't know. But I hope I'm not spoiling anything. Something cataclysmic happens to this character. And the actress playing this character gives a phenomenal performance. But unfortunately, that's all it is, a performance. I know, Mr. Beta, you haven't seen Discovery, but it is hauntingly effective.
Interesting. Nice.
But if I knew anything about this character, I would feel more about it. And I would say it's sublime. I'd say it's this. But that's the thing. All these characters in New Trek aren't involved in episodes where you can examine their psyches and examine their characters and see how they think and say, oh, that's so Berman, or that's so Pike, or that's so, you know, Saru.
Sure.
Not to the extent that you do in Next Generation. So this is where it really succeeds. And this is where, if anybody who's involved in these new Star Trek shows is listening, this is where I think you folks can improve. Characters are expanded. This is one of the reasons why I think the fan service is justified. Is it's the plot device that everybody's familiar with that doesn't need to be explained, so that it allows the audience to examine how the characters operate. Because you see a psychological profile of many of the characters, all essentially except Worf. Geordi is sensitive about his blindness. There's an 11-year payoff with that in Insurrection.
I forgot about that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, he talks about never seeing a sunrise or a rainbow, and then he sees a rainbow or sunrise. Yar, we talked about Yar's being intense in the first episode, Encounter at Farpoint. She's at odds with showing her femininity and balancing that with her hardened persona as a result of growing up on a lawless, failed colony. Data, we learn about him, for better or worse. He is anatomically complete.
Yep.
Didn't need to know that, but they spent the time to explain that. And I also noticed,
in the third episode. Yeah.
Yep. And he acts more human when drunk than sober. I noticed that too. And that's one of the failings that I think this episode has. But they took the time to explain that. And there's things that you can learn about his character there after he, explores humanity with the Oh, yes, we'll get there. But he explains part of his psyche. And Crusher and Picard, those feelings get explored. Wesley resents adults, and his disproportionate talent compared to his youth is a chip on his shoulder. He thinks he can do things better than the adults. That's a wonderful piece of characterization, which is examined over and over again for better or worse in the rest of the show. And Riker's arc is established here too. His Imzadi, his beloved, comes with a potentially fatal disease, and all he can think about is the duty of the ship. And that concept of putting duty over relationships pretty much stays the norm until Best of Both Worlds. So all of that is, again, by the third episode or second, depending on how you want to encounter at Farpoint, they do so much heavy lifting in terms of making you care about these characters than they ever have in any new Trek.
So. I think that's a great breakdown of those characters. And like you said, we basically get a little bit more on each of them, less Worf. But again, we know Worf's going to be kind of a late bloomer in this series overall. Definitely. As Denise Crosby's kind of in his role right now. Some things that I also thought worked about this. Again, I saw that Data Riker away team work at the very beginning, and I'm just on this kind of feeling kind of this Kirk Spock thing again, and I'm enjoying that relationship and seeing that. We get a chief engineer finally, and we know we need one. We know we need to approximate the work that Scotty does. We obviously need that role. And it's going to change a couple more times in the next few episodes, too. Does it change twice more or just once more?
I'm going to have to take a look at that.
Yeah, I'm going to say it changes twice more before we get Geordi. So there's like 3 chief engineers, then Geordi's the 4th. I don't know if I'd gamble on that, but I'm going to say that there's definitely one more where no one has gone before. But are there 2 more? That's the question. So it's fun to see.
This one's named McDougal.
McDougal, that's right.
That was again, trivia.
It's a white woman. White, it's McDougal. Exactly.
McDougal. You got a Japanese assistant who is not the chief engineer and where no man has gone before, and where no one has gone before. So well, and that's the thing too. If I may point up something from Roddenberry allegedly believed that having a counselor was more important than a chief engineer because at this point in human history, technology takes care of itself. Humans can't. So that's an interesting point there, and I'm kind of glad that they took Geordi away from his position and made him chief. But definitely,
I think it's just from a thinking about this from a storytelling point of view. It's just more interesting to put Geordi down in engineering and not have everyone on the bridge. Just because A, we get a different set and it's something visually interesting, and B, there are so many cool storylines that are going to go take place down in engineering. It's important to have a character that we like and can connect with down there. I think that's what I like about it. I think what's interesting is that we can still see them getting their legs, right? And it's going to take an entire season or even 2 for them to fully get running. But just them cycling through that engineer, trying to figure out how that's going to work, how to bring main engineering into this show, I think is fascinating. The last thing I'll say about what works is I like Beverly a lot in this episode. I like Beverly feels very real in her fear of what's going to happen when this thing gets out of control. Like, I think Gates McFadden does a great job at playing in episode or doing scripts with science mysteries. I don't know. It's just completely believable to me. And her haircut is hugely improved in this episode. Go take a look. We got crazy bangs in the first episode, and then this one they do a little bit of different thing with her hairstyle, and it's a great improvement. I don't know why that matters, but to me, I was just thinking like, oh, there's the Beverly I remember. Yeah.
You like Crusher. I like Crusher too, but in this episode, I have a special award for her.
Excellent. I can't wait till we get there. I cannot
I'll
wait till we
tease
get there.
that. I'll tease that for later. So, in terms of where things fail, I kind of outlined my stuff in terms of the unoriginality of devices and production values, drop in the bucket compared to other forms of Trek we could compare this to. But where in your opinion does this episode fail?
Okay, so when you were talking about fan service with Riker, so this all comes from Riker. He goes on this away mission, right? And the only thing when he comes back and we start the episode proper, Act 1, the only thing he tells Data is like, I want you to look up stuff about people taking showers in their clothing, right? Like that's how this thing gets going, which eventually leads to him uncovering information about the original series episode, The Naked Time, right? So that is something I am critical of, just Riker remembering this, and that's the instigation for for bringing in the original series, for trying to get this mystery solved, is just something Riker remembers. I don't know. I think that's kind of weak, in my opinion. And I also wondered if it was kind of like supposed to be breaking the fourth wall too. Like, is he supposed to? Because is he supposed to be like asking the audience, "Do you remember what episode I'm talking about?" Because I kind of was like, "Are you asking me that?" Because I remember the episode where they take a shower in their clothes, and it's called The Naked Time, you know. So I don't know. That kind of felt like a little fourth wall breaking. Wesley taking over the Enterprise in episode 2, I think, is a big mark against it, because it really breaks my sense of kind of believability in a way, in the fact that if you could create a voice impersonator and take over the entire ship, you know, it feels just really rushed and unearned to me. Like, it'd be cool if Wesley was working for like a couple episodes on taking over the ship and then finally did, and it went horribly wrong or something like that. Or that was, I don't know. It just seems like it's just too unearned. It's just too quick, in my opinion. And I know Wesley's way more of a major character in the first couple seasons than obviously later, and so they want to get things going with him. But yeah, those are my biggest things. Outside of that orchestral soundtrack too, it's like, we know that it's bad when a star blows up. We don't need you to like put in that big fanfare violin extravaganza, you know, to make us realize it. That is just not necessary. And they would start cutting that out later, which I really like. And they let the actors, their performance, carry the intensity of the scene, how intense we're supposed to be taking it. Okay, and so the last 2 points I have on criticism are the Tasha Data scene. We can talk about that here. The very last thing I have is that basically speeding up the camera, or speeding up the footage of Brent Spiner putting the isolating chips back in, is weak. I just think that's weak, you know? It's like, oh no, Data, can you put the chips in faster? Oh my goodness. I don't know. I'm just, I don't care about that. That's not interesting to me. So those are kind of where I see it going. Is that fourth wall being broken with Riker's comment, and Wesley it feels a little too rushed there. Okay, let's talk about Tasha Data. Do you want me to get going, or you want to start this one?
Or you go ahead.
No, you go for it. You started. Data should not have.
Okay.
What do you got?
Data should not get the virus. When you take into account everything else that's been established about Data, considering he's an artificial life form, anytime they have a situation in which there's a biological contaminant or some sort of force that is hazardous to organic life, Data is immune to that. Exactly. I don't know where they were going with, I don't know why they decided to have Data express himself physically, let's just put it that way, and use that part of his programming. It makes no sense for that.
Does he get the virus from Tasha, or does he get it from somewhere else?
It's implied that he gets it from Tasha.
Yeah. Got it. So it's like an STD in this scene too.
Oh, yeah.
It's really strange. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so a couple things that I'm critical of this scene. And first of all, I got no problem with Denise Crosby and Brent Spiner's acting. I got no problem with that. I'm way more critical of the script. So in the script, Tasha says that when she was 5 years old, she learned how to avoid the rape gangs. And this is followed by dialogue that then reads, "What I want now is gentleness and joy and love." And to me, I get why those are put side by side. But the rape gang part feels incredibly shocking, especially in an episode about drunkenness. You know, and I'm really worried in context of an American audience who Americans picture when they picture rape gangs. You know, like this is definitely a phenomenon that exists contemporarily. There's no doubt in my mind, gang rape. How much we want to talk about this on this episode, I don't know if we can in too much detail. But my point is, it is real, and I do feel like it could very well be fair game for a television series even to explore. Yet, whoa, it's really shocking, and it just is brought up, and then it goes away.
And then dropped.
And then drop completely. And then Tasha doesn't even want a relationship at the end of the episode with Data. She basically says it never happened. So I don't know. It's really interesting to bring up some deep characterization about Tasha and then to drop it completely. And just in the context of this episode, especially with drunkenness and American audiences, I don't know. To me, it's just, wow, I can't believe they went there. That's the scene basically is the same if they don't mention that, which is why I think it's no good and in some respects, you know?
Yeah, no, that your perspective there is extremely poignant because it is extremely intense. And that definitely brings up a strong point of discussion, whether we continue that discussion here and now or later on remains to be seen. But yeah, that is a very, as I said, that one word, if you cut that word out, the scene plays out from a functional standpoint very much the same because they don't explore it again.
Exactly. 5 years old, I learned how to avoid the gangs is exactly the same outcome.
Yeah.
So, and 5 years old, that brings up child sexual abuse. So it's just all sorts of like, I'm not really sure what they were going for, or how that got past the showrunners when all is said and done, you know?
Season 1, as we're going to see in our next podcast episode, plays fast and loose with volatile material. And that's we see a glimpse of that in this episode, to be sure.
So absolutely.
With that in mind, so we've established that Data getting the virus makes no sense. So every so often when circumstances allow it, I'd like to issue challenges, and Mr. Beta, you can issue challenges too. But this first challenge that we have here is, since it's established later on in the show that Data has no biological components and therefore it makes no sense for him to get the Psi 2000 virus here, there is one character in this entire episode that does not get infected, and that's Worf. And from my perspective, between him and Worf, between Data and Worf, Worf is a better candidate of getting the virus because he is organic. He's an organic life form as opposed to an artificial life form. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on this, and then I'll tell you mine. So here's my plot twist challenge. What would happen if Worf got the virus instead of Data?
Okay, so this is really interesting because we don't have a lot of characterization for Worf. We do know he wanted to ask to clean up the bridge and remove Q. So we've got a little bit of characterization for Worf. So to be honest, how would it work? I think, honestly, it would bring out more of Worf's military or combat instincts, and I think he would end up maybe fighting someone, you know, and it would make a major inconvenience. Maybe he goes down to engineering and he beats up the assistant chief engineer, and that's why they can't get the isolinear chips back in or something like that. I don't instead of just the chief engineer being a fool and pulling them out. I don't really know. To be honest, I I guess it depends how Worf gets it, but I still see Data sleeping with Tasha. I don't know if that changes anything because Data is technically sober when that happens, so I'm not sure if that plot point changes. But yeah, I can see maybe Worf getting in a fight or something like that, and causing something bad to happen that way. What's your
I
twist on
like
that?
I like the engineering bit. I think that satisfies the bigger plot better. I really like that. In terms of characterization, and they kind of explore this later on in episodes like Hide and Q. Worf's loneliness on the ship, being the only
Yeah.
Klingon, and his resentment of humans, even though he has adapted to human culture, expanding that or talking about how he's an orphan, because that gets shoehorned later in later episodes, talking about
Yep.
the trauma of that, talking about the alleged dishonor of his family, and how that played a role potentially in him getting on the ship. I was thinking of this more from a character perspective than a plot perspective. I honestly think if we blended those two together, um, he gets it from getting into a fight. You go ahead.
You know what's interesting is that I don't think Worf really takes off, and all those things that you mentioned about his character, they don't really take off till Ron Moore gets involved. Maybe a little
True.
before Ron Moore gets involved, but I really think I really love Ron Moore. I really love Deep Space Nine and Battlestar. If you couldn't tell earlier, I really strained to talk about how bad Emissary was. I didn't want to, but I had to. But anyways. Yeah, we just don't. Thinking about what they knew about Worf at the time when this episode came out, I just don't think they knew anything about him. I think they knew the basics, some very basic sketches. But if they did know more about him and they knew some of the stuff you're alluding to, absolutely, that'd be a great way to bring that out much earlier than having to wait and wait and wait and wait and wait. And then get a bunch of it season 3 through 7, basically.
Definitely. No, I like that. That's a good point. Hollywood, if you're wondering, we can help between
absolutely.
The two of us. So with that in
I'm getting some
mind,
Ron Moore hair right now. Honestly, I've been taking my hit my style from him these days. So Ron, yeah, I could be your spiritual successor. I know a lot about Battlestar and Klingons. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's keep going.
Okay, let's close this up with facts and first. Thank you, dear audience, for staying with us so far.
Yes. While we've slowly brought the saucer back to the drive section. I know it's been exciting. I know it has.
I hope so.
What do you got for us, dude?
So Maurice Hurley, as I pointed out earlier, noted head writer of Miami Vice, is a producer.
Yes.
Considering that show's reputation, I made notes while I was watching the scene. How did they get this past censors? How did they get that past censors? The detail with Yar you brought up. How did they get all that past censors? And all of it makes sense when you consider Maurice Hurley and Miami Vice's reputation. It makes more sense from that perspective. And this is not a commentary in any way, shape, or form, but it's just considering the filmography of the people involved, the tone of that episode makes a lot more sense. Also, when Picard refers to Yar as having a, quote, snootful, which usually, for those of you who don't know, is in reference to taking as much alcohol as necessary to get drunk. That's the definition of snootful. When I found out that Maurice Hurley was involved, when Picard said snootful, I immediately thought of cocaine. Because Miami Vice.
From Miami Vice, absolutely.
Trek Bits. This episode was written by J. Michael Bingham, which you may not know, but you might know the actual person. J. Michael Bingham is a pen name for DC Fontana. So we've pretty much reviewed all 3 episodes we've reviewed are DC Fontana creations. Birth of a Gimmick. Picard, this has been memed to death, but Riker's famous habit of sitting on consoles while talking to a character, that whole trope and gimmick is born in the scene that you mentioned in which Riker breaks the fourth wall. Again, first mentioned, the chief engineer is named McDougal, the blonde lady, but is not announced again on the intercom and is, to my knowledge, seldom seen again. So that's
I'm looking for her, but I don't know if she's ever going to show up again.
I don't think so either. So those are my first and facts. Do you have any, Mr. Beta?
No, sir. I'm ready for awards. Can I go first on the award
Go ahead.
circuit?
Go ahead.
Well, it's going to be a brief one because as far as a salute to matte paintings, there are exactly 0 in this episode. We got none. So I can't really call out anyone's amazing matte paintings in this one. However, we can talk Enterprise interiors, and I know a lot of these interiors will come up a whole bunch. You know, they're not as unique as the Battle Bridge. But I wanted to give a shout out to Dr. Crusher's office, aka the CMO's office. We don't spend a ton of time here, but I would say that 85 to 90% of science mysteries are solved in the set. You know, so I love Dr. Crusher's office. It's basically like her ready room. You got to have one if you're the CMO. And yeah, there'll be some good stuff that goes down in this Enterprise interior. So I didn't learn what set it was on. I'll go dig around and figure out where set bay or sick bay is on the Paramount lot. But yeah, shout out to Dr. Crusher's office.
You mentioned stage 9, or my wife and I have actually been to stage 9 on the Paramount lot when Star Trek turned 50 years old in 2016. I told a part of my Star Trek on the Spectrum story, and J.J. Abrams and everybody, all the people involved with Star Trek Beyond flew my wife and me down, and we went to stage 9. They made a little party set. It was great.
Nice.
So yeah, when you said stage 9, my alarm bells came up. So my Picard Facepalm Award for this episode, most embarrassing addition, goes without saying. The scene you brought up, didn't need to know that Data was anatomically complete, but here we are. Doesn't come up again until Star Trek First Contact. Just
for the record, I don't really mind so much that they give us that detail. The fact that he never gets to use it again, so to speak. Why make this feature and then not allow him to be in a romantic relationship again? I don't know. It just that's more annoying to me than anything. He does get to try. Yeah. That's the whole point of the episode.
He does get to try. Yes, very
sorry,
much
I didn't
so.
mean to interrupt there, but
no,
my more of the face palm is just never again. This guy's never going to get a chance at a romantic relationship again. So
of that form again.
Yeah.
So well, until First Contact.
Oh yeah.
For better or worse, until First Contact. You mentioned your admiration for Dr. Crusher, and I have admiration for her too, but not in this episode. I've created an award here called the You Fool Award. The You Fool Award is attributed to a nonsensical character action which only happens to set the plot in motion. So the reason why Dr. Crusher qualifies for the You Fool Award is Geordi clearly has a viral infection or something that the Enterprise transporter filters cannot isolate. And yet, he's able to go freely. I gave her a pass on that one. Fine. You turn your back. As educators, you turn your back on people one instant, and they may not be there in the same configuration when you turn back. I'll give her a pass on that. That's fine. But where the reason why she qualifies for the You Fool Award is Yar takes Geordi back to sickbay. At this point, it is clearly established that there's something wrong. There's some biological contagion, and Crusher does not quarantine Yar. Yeah, that is why Dr. Crusher is the first recipient of the inaugural You Fool Award. Because again, I get it. Go ahead.
Yes, and you know what? If you explore Trek a little bit, as you definitely have, you pretty much realize the chief medical officer is one of the most powerful positions on the ship. Mm-hmm. The chief medical officer can 25th Amendment the captain. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean?
That's a good description.
That's totally a good description. Can. And what I mean by that, obviously, for those who are up on the amendments, is that she can basically pull him from duty if she thinks there's some sort of medical or psychological issue that's affecting his judgment or affecting his ability to command. And so, like, she definitely could have quarantined Yar. She definitely could have quarantined, she could have probably made a call to the bridge and had them transported immediately to isolation. You know what I'm saying? Like, wherever they were on the ship. wouldn't have even been an issue. But yeah, then you couldn't have an episode if there was quarantine. It would make for a really boring episode.
unless you twisted the plot, and I wrote this down in my notes. You quarantine Yar, but the virus becomes airborne.
Yeah,
and that's how you get. That's how you get Worf getting sick. That's how everybody gets sick except maybe Data. So, a couple tweaks to the script to make it great, because the big twist to this is the original Dr. McCoy serum doesn't work perfectly. Instead of doing that, or perhaps in addition to doing that, you twist the plot so that everybody's quarantined, but the virus goes airborne. But maybe it's because current events have tainted my opinion of how viruses work. But definitely, I again, Hollywood, if you want, I mean, we can do both.
The only other thing I can think of. Exactly. The only other thing I can think of is like make Tasha break out of quarantine somehow. Make it a really dramatic decision whether she has to stay in or she has to break it for some reason. You know what I'm saying? Like the decision to stay and safeguard the health of the crew or risk it, and then make that risk pay off somehow, and maybe in the fifth act. Yet obviously acts 3, 4 go really badly because of the risk taken. I don't know. Just you're right. You simple fix Airborne, or come up with a more complex character decision to get her out of quarantine. But you're absolutely right. Crusher's a fool for not quarantining someone with a virus. That's like you don't even need to go to med school to learn that. You know. Just had to be a teacher in 2020. You know.
Yes, exactly. Well said. Deep respect for Dr. Crusher. Love the character, but that one was her bad. Somebody had to eat it, and it happened to be Crusher this episode. So
hey, it's probably going to happen again. Let's be honest.
What's that?
It's probably going to happen again. Her getting that award. If we get to Sub Rosa, for example,
a few episodes come to mind. Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking of. So with that in mind, we are several hours into this episode. As they say in Hawaiian, mahalo nui loa, that means deepest thanks, the deepest thanks imaginable. Mahalo nui loa for all of you who have stayed tuned with all this. With in mind, I have been Captain Kanaka. You can follow me currently on Monokoa Enterprises. I'm developing a YouTube channel in which I explain how to use science fiction and culturally responsive teaching for lesson plan designs. And I'm also available on Teachers Pay Teachers under Monokoa Enterprises. That's the title of my store. That's my handle. And perhaps next episode, I can explain how I came to that if there's interest. So that's me. Would you like to sign off, Mr. Beta?
Yes, this is Scholar Beta here, science fiction teacher up in Portland, Oregon. Thanking everyone for paying attention to this, or whoever subscribes or chooses to continue to pay attention to our ongoing discussion of Trek. Really appreciate you. Really appreciate season 1, even though it's kind of not the season that stands out the most. I think it's going to be really fun to go back through. This is kind of one that people kind of fast forward to, and then they get to season 3, and then things really start going and working out for this show. But grateful for everyone who's willing to sit through and discuss seasons 1 and 2, because I don't think they get talked about enough. I don't know where you can find me online, but someday soon I'm going to get that Twitter going back again, and maybe my own online store. So be looking for me there.
There you go. As they say in Star Trek, live long and prosper. And as they say in Hawaiian, e malama pono, which is Hawaiian for take care, be healthy, especially now. So live long and prosper, and e malama pono.
Yes, my friend. Peace and long life.
This concludes the light version of this episode. On behalf of Scholar Beta, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please stay tuned for deluxe versions of this episode, in which video footage will be interspliced with our commentary to enhance our podcast experience. With all that said, thank you very much for the support. Any feedback you give is appreciated because it helps the kids. And with that said, live long and prosper, e malama pono, and we'll see you next time.